الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And welcome to the Balagh webinar on organ donation, opt-in or opt-out. And alhamdulillah, we have a number of panelists, all recognized within our communities and in the academic circles, as well as amongst the ulama. So let me just initially start off by just giving you a bit of a brief on each particular panelist. So we'll start off with Dr. Aasim Padela. Dr. Aasim Padela is an emergency medicine physician in health services, researcher, and a bioethicist, whose scholarship focuses mainly on intersection of minority health and bioethics through the lens of healthcare experiences of Muslim patients as well as health professionals. So Dr. Padela's normative bioethics works generally focus on applied Islamic bioethics, and he is interested mainly in the ways in which Islamic tradition and the standard bearers of that tradition assess modern biomedicine. So his interests mainly lie in the scientific data and ways of knowing how one can inform work in concert with traditional Islamic moral and scholastic theology. Dr. Padela has worked around and has been featured in multiple media outlets, including New York Times, USA Today, the Chicago Tribune, and the National. And he's written a number of journal articles on organ transplantation and brain death related to Islam and Muslims. Our next panelist is Mufti Zubair Mawlana. Mufti Zubair Mawlana is a British-born and scholar who's committed to the Holy Quran to memory at the age of 16, and he went on to receive authorization, ijaza, in the 10 varied recitals of the Holy Quran at the Institute for Islamic Education at Dewsbury. So he studied traditional Islamic sciences, including Arabic languages and all the different ulum and sciences. And he completed his Shahada, his certificate in Alamiya at the Darul Uloom Karachi in Pakistan in 1995. And he graduated from his post of specialization in issuance of fatwa, legal verdicts, and under the instruction of the world-renowned Sheikh Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani. Mufti Zubair also holds a position of senior advisor on the Islamic law at the Institute of Islamic Jurisprudence, Bradford. He also is an active presenter in various fields, including health and education, and serves as chair of the Sharia advisor, and he's also lectures on ethics of transplants and autopsy at the University of Leeds, and is a regular contributor to seminars on Islamic medical ethics. He's also the chair of Al-Qalam Sharia Scholar Panel, which deals with mainly issues related to Islamic finance. And he has been quoted in a number of UK government organ transplantation websites on behalf of the Muslim Council of Britain on the issue of organ transplantation. And finally, our panelist is Dr. Majid Mukadam, who is a cardiothoracic transplant surgeon and who's worked in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham for over 17 years. He's also been awarded an MBE on the Queen's Birthday Honours List for services to transplantation patients. And he's been known to have encouraged approximately over 1,000 people to join the register. So a transplant surgeon from Birmingham Hospital who's encouraged thousands of Asians to sign the donor register has won a top award for his work as well, where he's been recognized for having awarded the Hospital Health Star Award for encouraging thousands of Asians to join the register. So it'll be interesting to hear his views on organ donation as well. Now, just before I begin and we start having our little questions thrown at our panelists, let me just explain the issue today in the UK. So MPs have generally voted to support a change in the law on organ donation that could save countless lives every year. So the organ donation bill will be introduced on an opt-out process, following similar systems in Wales and Scotland. So this differs from current rules, where donors or their families have to declare if they are happy for their organs to be donated after their death. So under this new proposed law, people have to declare if they do not want to be a donor. Now, just to clarify some of the statistics, South Asians generally represent 5.1% of the UK population, and they actually count as 34% of the total number of patients on the waiting list. So you can already see a real contrast there. Now, as far as I can see, remember looking at the figures recently, approximately three people will die every day not receiving an organ. And there's approximately over 6,500 on the waiting list at the moment. So you can see the extent of the problem. So before we go into the detail, let's just begin by throwing some of the questions at some of our panelists. We will give you guys an opportunity also to ask questions. So what I will try to do is get some of the main questions in, and then we will open this out to everybody. Now, let's begin with Dr. Majid Mukadam. So can you just give us a bit of an idea about how big this problem is of the need for organs, specifically in the Muslim community?
Assalamu alaikum. So first of all, I should thank you for organizing this webinar on such an important subject, which we need to discuss. The problem is huge. It's not only for Muslims, but all Asian communities. As we know that people from Asian background have more incidence of diabetes and heart diseases, and which lead to organ failure. And subsequently, need for the transplant is higher in this population. As you said, there are more than 6,500 patients on the waiting list for transplant at this moment in time, and nearly 1/3 of them are from the Asian background, and most of them are from our Muslim community. Now, these patients, if I can put in perspective, are waiting for a kidney transplant more by almost a year more than the host white community, and they are attached to the dialysis for longer duration. And as you know, dialysis is not an easy thing, to be attached to the machine for more than 3 hours per day, 3 times a week. So our Muslim patients are suffering, and the problem is huge. Now, and also, as you said, the mortality on the waiting list is high for our community because of the shortage of organs, because you can't get matched organs for these suffering patients. Now, as against that, the number of transplant that these patients, that our Asian patients or Muslim patients have had in this country is about nearly 25% of the transplants are happening for the Asian population. And most of them, as I said, are Muslims. While if you see the donors, then the less than nearly 1 or 2% of the donors are from the Asian community. So there is a lot of disparity, and we feel for these suffering patients, and the more work we do, the better it is for these patients.
Okay, let's move on to Mufti Zubair. You've been quoted on the organ donation website, UK, stating that according to a similarly large number of Muslim scholars, organ donation is not permitted. They consider that organ donation compromises the special honor accorded to a man, and this cannot be allowed whatever the cost. So why do Muslim scholars differ on this issue?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
I also extend my gratitude for inviting me onto this webinar, which is a very important subject. Let me just go back to the history of that statement first. In 2002, there was a multi-faith discussion in the city of Bradford on organ donation, where we had representatives of different communities. And the perspective on behalf of Muslims that was presented was that organ donation is permissible. You have nothing to worry about. Go ahead, you can donate your organs. And there are a few people who disagree, but they don't really know too much about this area, and so you can disregard them. That was kind of the flavor of the presentation which was made by the late Dr. Zaki Badawi. Now, I had an issue with that particular kind of approach because it failed to recognize the discussion among scholars and ulama and just presented one view. Then in 2002, a leaflet was produced by the on organ donation, and this one-sided view was presented in that leaflet, simply stating that Islam allows organ donation, and there are a number of organizations from Saudi and Egypt and other different Iran and other different countries to allow organ donation, so therefore organ donation is permissible. Again, there was no reference to any dissenting position. Then about 10 years later, I was asked to have a look at this leaflet and see, what my thoughts were on there. And at that point, I pointed out that, look, there is a valid debate on this issue, and this leaflet fails to recognize that. And so it was on that basis this statement was produced, where an equally large number of people do dissent, etc. So that's the history of that statement.
Okay. Dr. Aasim Padela, let's go back to the whole concept of some of these resolution committees and their decisions. So are the fatwa on organ donation clear for Muslim public and medical practitioners? Are they clear? And if they're not, are there any gaps? Where are the gaps?
Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Barakallahu feek for inviting me to join here. So let me directly get into your question. I think that from the perspective of a patient or a physician, and even from a legal perspective, that the extant fatwa have many gaps, and I'll break them down to 3 different areas. One is in terms of terminology. So if you're looking for an answer whether or not Islam quote-unquote permits organ donation, you'll find that the fatwa are not particularly clear whether they are permitted, is it haram, or is it recommended? And oftentimes they don't discuss the plurality of views, as Mufti Zubair said. So you might pick up a fatwa and says you should. Where does that stand? That should stand on the moral status of Islam. Is it obligation? Is it a recommendation? Or is it simply a permission, right? It's just mubah. So I think from that conceptual terminology of the moral status of actions, sometimes the fatwa aren't clear, or if they are clear, then you can find a contributing fatwa that says something else. The second standpoint would be in the terms of context or contingencies. So you can have a hukm, as we all know, hukm to fatwa, right? There's a difference between a hukm and a fatwa. But here, there's a question of shurut, of conditions. So under what conditions would a organ donation be permitted, right? What are they specifically, thinking about the context, right? Because many contextual factors might make something that is mubah become haram, or something that is mubah become actually mandub to do. So they're not specific about the conditions, again, and they use terminology that is not one that's germane to medical practice or even to the public. So what does life-saving mean? What does a vital organ mean? What's life-enhancing? Which organs? So a fatwa, for someone researching the field, you would find, well, what exactly are they talking about? Is this some conceptual, theoretical organ donation, or is it the one that I could do in my hospital? Is it living? Is it dead? Is it in between? So and the third area is in the reasoning and the constructs. So as your dissertation speaks about, but there are many different dalail that are brought to bear. And for the informed consumer, right? So today we move beyond the olden days, okay, just give me the hukm, right? And we're done. Or just give me the fatwa. But people want to understand the issues at stake. So the reasoning employed is sometimes opaque and not clear, or maybe logically flawed. So what's maslahah here? What's darura, right? How do we think about that? What is a hurma? So when someone who's semi-informed, like physicians are very semi-informed, right? They have some basis, they want to understand how to apply something in their practice. They don't find the terminology accessible or the logical reasoning employed clear. So in these and many other ways, I think there are gaps within the fatwa that exist.
So are you saying that there is something about how the fatwa are presented in a clinical way, in sort of?
Right. So I said 3 things, right? In terms of just the Islamic legal terminology, right? The contextual issues that they're talking about, what are the conditions, and then how it's presented as well, right? So what is the reasoning behind it? How is the medical understanding bringing to bear the hukm that's offered? They're opaque. And I'll just say this: Hanafi ulama, we have a tradition, right? That they just give you the ruling. They don't give you much more. And this is our pattern, convention. But as you know, Saudis and others don't have that convention, and we just don't look at Hanafi ulama. So this becomes a problem when you see one fatwa is very detailed, and one is 3 sentences.
But shouldn't that be the role of maybe clinicians to actually translate that language into a language which clearly is in line with the medical profession? And also remember that we have a number of people who are from general public who actually read these fatwa, and they interpret it in their own kind of way. So even the way it translates, that doesn't necessarily have to be ulama, but it could be people who sit with ulama and discuss these issues with them.
I agree, but you're assuming that the Muslim physician understands legal terminology. You're assuming that the Muslim physician is able to push back against some unclarity within the fatwa. So yes, I agree that Muslim physicians should undertake Islamic bioethics courses like this one to get some conceptual clarity on how they can understand fatwa. But you know that learning how to read a fatwa is not something that's even done in the first year of an Alim program yet.
Yeah.
Right? Right? It's some knowledge basis before you do that.
Dr. Mukadam,
yeah,
you're a thoracic, cardiothoracic transplant surgeon, not just a typical physician. So how comfortable do you feel in your job as a transplant surgeon, somebody who's a Muslim, a practicing Muslim, in terms of its permissibility? I mean, do you feel comfortable doing this?
yes, alhamdulillah, meaning I feel blessed by Allah Ta'ala to give me an opportunity to serve these suffering patients. Initially, when I started, there were some people who were reticent or who used to question whether what I am doing is haram or not. So that led me to sort of go into detail, and I met several ulmas from India. I come from India, so I met several ulmas in India and some scholars in this country as well, with whom I sat about 15 years ago and explained to them what I do. And then they came to the conclusion, no, alhamdulillah, that what you're doing is truly a good service, because here, as a heart transplant surgeon, some patients we come across who have only few hours or few days to live, and obviously the giving life at that, and this is in Allah's hand. We just become the Zariya, and we just apply our trade and do things, and Allah Ta'ala gives them shifa. So from that perspective, I'm quite comfortable in what I'm doing, and also I'm also, because now over 15 years I have seen that the process of organ retrieval and transplantation is quite transparent, and there are lots of regulations in place. There are audits which take place to make sure that every unit is adhering to the principles and the standards that have been set. So and also there's a human tissue authority which has a lot of powers and regulation to stop anybody from transplanting, stop any unit from transplanting if the standards are not maintained. Now, what are the standards? Somebody will ask a question.
Dr. Mukadam, just to hold you for a short while, we'll come back to that because I think it's very important what you're sort of heading towards. But before I do that, I just want to go back to Mufti Zubair. Mufti Zubair, you're a Mufti, somebody who's recognized in Muslim communities. Your fatwa are recognized. You play a quite important role in some of your positions as chair of a number of organizations and some of your presentations to academics at universities. So tell me, what do you think? Why are the ulama not clear about this issue? Why is there confusion amongst people like Dr. Aasim Padela, who's a bioethicist, physicians like Dr. Mukadam, and just generally the general public? Why is there some element of confusion that still exists?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In answering this question, I'll go back to the previous question as well, when you asked why do Muslim scholars differ on the issue. Well, first of all, this issue is one of ijtihad, is one of it where there's not a clear-cut judgment in the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So the scholars have to infer. So they have to use their own abilities to infer a ruling, and quite naturally you are going to get different answers. Second reason for a difference is that there's a different approach to legal reasoning, which Dr. Aasim Padela also touched on. You have different madhahibs, different schools of Islamic law, and you have different levels of adhering to that particular school of Islamic law. And you have within certain scholars, rather than adhere to the law, they will try to go back to the original text of the Quran and Sunnah. And so because of that, you have a plethora of views. Third reason, it's a very subjective domain. And because it really boils down to human dignity. And exactly what human dignity is and what are the parameters of human dignity is a very subjective subject. And so therefore, you are going to get a difference of opinion. Fourth reason, because of a difference between physicians. Now, I would present Egypt as a case in point. People appear, what is presented is that you have a uniform voice from different countries, for example, Azhar or Egypt. However, the main reason there was a dispute for years and years, and still continues today in Egypt amongst the scholars, and the reason for that was a dispute amongst the physicians who were advising the scholars, and they saw problems with organ donation, and some were for it. So, and particularly the issue was around defining death, which I think we'll go on to discuss later on as well. So we have the discussions around this are subjective, and there are still areas of dispute among physicians and academics. Then you have different academic approaches to the whole issue of organ donation. You have the deontological approach, where you discuss the issue on its own merits, or you have a utilitarian approach, where look, and some of what Dr. Majid Mukadam have mentioned today, look, how we can affect the lives of certain people who are suffering. Look how wonderful organ donation is, and this is what we get at the end of it. Let's forget how we got there. Let's forget the procedure and the method. Let's just look what we got at the end of it. Somebody who was going to die, possibly is now not going to die, and who was a father, was a mother, and now who has many children they're looking after. Look at all the benefits you can bring. So because there are different approaches, that's why you have difference of opinion. With regards to the question you asked now, the issues that I have is with the scholars is within the UK. My approach to this is this issue is something that we have to solve within the boundaries of the UK with the scholars of the UK. Now, one of the difficulties I've found is the difficulty in engaging with the ulama in the UK beyond a very surface level inquiry. Is it permissible or not permissible? When you delve into the issues around surrounding organ donation, you find that you are treading a lone path. There's nobody to walk alongside you. So that is one thing that we have. And the reason for that is we're not properly resourced. We don't resource our ulama. There's no capacity building. That doesn't happen. We just expect an answer because our ulama should know. Now, another issue I face is dismissive attitudes towards a dissenting voice or any criticism or any scrutiny. If somebody has a different opinion or says, hang on a second, nobody is ready to listen to that. It's a case of, why are you not along on the journey? Look how fantastic this is. So I think, whereas this does exist in academic circles, with the community want a simple answer, they want a quick answer, hopefully a favorable answer. They are not too concerned with the intricacies or the discussions surrounding organ donation. And when it comes to NHS bodies, my personal experience with them has been quite positive one. They are willing to engage, willing to discuss. They are restricted only by funding. And what happens, you have certain programs that run for a year or 2, 3 years, and then they come to the end. And so the whole effort goes to, I won't say waste, but it becomes stunted because they don't have the money to continue. So there are various factors why the discussion around organ donation has not really progressed within the Muslim community and the Muslim scholarship.
Okay, Dr. Aasim, for somebody who's done quite a bit of research in Muslim populations and their acceptance of organ donation.
Asking me about why Muslim populations are less likely to donate organs. So I'll share with you that this is a phenomenon that we found, or the research community has found in diasporic communities, both in the UK, United States, or Australia, as well as within the Muslim majority nations. For example, there's research done in Saudi Arabia, in Turkey, where compared to rates of at least verbal, what's the word? Verbal, not awareness, but sort of assent to organ donation, or at least believing that having positive views towards organ donation, Muslims fall lower. I think there's several reasons for that from the research literature. One has to do with the ethical notions here, right? So they're less inclined ethically. And so what do I mean by that? Well, there's questions that they have, like there's lack of clarity about quote unquote the Islamic position. So you might say that's one aspect of the ethical domain. There's also the questions about ownership and procedures, right? So this is an ethical concern, doesn't root itself necessarily within Islamic jurisprudence, but what's going to happen in the hospital? Are they going to treat me? Are they going to let my loved one die earlier because they need organs? So there's a sense of what's happening, the purview of what's happening around organ donation. They have ethical questions about that process and procedure. And if you think about the fact that most diasporic communities are immigrants, there's a medical distrust at times. And then the third thing I think is just generally they're less informed of the processes. So how does one go about living organ donation? How does one go about deceased organ donation? How does one limit the organs that would like to be donated? How does one have their family members be authorized to overrule their own views, right? Can this happen? So the procedural aspects of how you go about, they are also lacking awareness of. So for these three reasons, I think, from the literature, you'll find that many Muslims are paused, right, or they're reticent to donate their organs.
It's interesting how I read, I think it was one of your research articles, in terms of the fact that you defined Muslim scholars as two types. There's those who have an academic interest more so, and they do a lot of research, and they usually are the ones that produce the fatwa. And then we have the others, which are you term the Islahi scholars, who are generally the scholars who, in essence, influence society, or Muslims. Just tell us a bit more about that.
This concept of Islahi versus Ilmi scholars is one that Sheikh Amin Khulwadiya from Dar al-Qasim spoke to in great detail. And so it's not my construction, it's his. I mapped it onto how we think about it in terms of health behavior theory. And my student and colleague now, Dr. Rashid, he was the first author of the paper. So let me say it's not just me, it's a group of people. But the point was the differentiating between Muslim scholarship, as you said, ilmi, meaning individuals who are thinking about what are the textual sources telling us about such and such process. Maybe you can say they are at the theoretical level, conceptual level, not at the applied level. So they're mining the text and the source text and the legal manuals, thinking about how to address an issue. Islahi scholars are those who are at the front lines, as you mentioned. So the chaplains, the imams, and the masjids. So the translation between what is the hukum or what's the fatwa and what people understand, the mediated understanding of publics, is through Islahi scholars. So you can say, yeah, it's permitted to donate organs, but should I donate my organs? That translation from a permitted act to one that is maybe for an individual they should or shouldn't do, that mediation occurs at the Islahi level. And so that's how the paper came about. And here we spoke about this is how you move public opinion. You can't just have some theoretical fatwa. You need to have it mobilized and leveraged within the popular understanding. So that mediation occurs at that ground level of that trusted advisor, that trusted chaplain, that trusted imam. At times in our community, there's a disconnect. You have a lot of, and you know, on the minbar, you have a lot of people who sort of just give khutbahs, right? And they're not connected to the Ilmi tradition. And so you have confusion there as well. But if you have this linkage between what the texts say and the books say and the scholars say and the fiqh councils say and what is happening at the ground level, then you can leave to public change and awareness. I'll give you one example, just very briefly. So here in the United States, we had an issue about whether we should sign up for health insurance, right? There was healthcare reform. People are becoming bankrupt because they can't afford healthcare, not like the NHS there. So the question was, can we do this? Is health insurance permissible? That's an ilmi question. Is this halal? Right? But at the ground level, people are getting fatwas, sign up for organ donation. Sign up for health insurance. Is this actually true? Should we do that? Should we say it's now fuddled or it's obliged to sign up for health insurance? So insurance schema might be questionable in an ilmi paradigm. These sorts of things are not thought about. That's why I'm sharing this distinction.
Okay, I suppose there are some writings which clearly define some of the reasons why Muslims may decide not to donate. And some of them tend to sort of mainly focus on the issue about the fear of their organs being procured at the time or the process. Dr. Mukadam, could you just outline in general terms the journey that a person would go through who is brain dead or diagnosed as brain dead? Even give us a bit of an idea about what the process of brain death diagnosis is all about until the time that their organs are procured and retrieved. Can you just give us a bit about that?
Yeah, sorry, go on. No, sure. I think this is a very important subject which our community should know. And coming from me, as you said, I have been in transplantation for 17 years, so I have seen the process very closely. So first thing, what happens is when there is a potential donor in the intensive care unit, there is an intensive care physician who approaches the family and then mentions about organ donation, and before that they perform the brainstem death. It is very important to make sure that the brainstem death tests are performed by two senior anesthetists at two different times, so that they are satisfied that now the brainstem death has occurred. Once that happens, then the specialist nurse for organ donation approaches the family to obtain the consent. After the consent, the clinical details are taken and then are passed on to all the centers who are interested in, who have the recipients for these organs, and then these organs are offered. Once the organs are offered and placed, then the retrieval team comes into play. They call the surgeon. There is an anesthetist and there is a scrub nurse who goes to the donor hospital, does some test on the donor to make sure that those organs are working well. And once those organs are taken, they will work well in the recipient. Because the most important thing here is obviously to make sure that these organs are good enough for the recipient. And also at the same time, all these team members are familiar with the need to respect the body and give as much attention to maintaining the dignity of the body as much as possible. So the patient is taken to the operating theater, and then the procedure of retrieval of organ is started.
Just to go back, Dr. Mukadam, just to go back to the issue, from a relative's perspective, now they see a close loved one who the doctors have diagnosed, let's say, with brain death.
Yeah.
So there are quite thorough assessments and tests that are done to come to a diagnosis of brain death, which are quite extensive.
Yeah.
And they're not just done by one particular clinician. There are actually two or sometimes even three clinicians who do these tests. But for the relative, what they see there is somebody, their close relative, who's still warm. Are there any gaps? Where are the gaps? They're still breathing.
Alhamdulillah,
the colour's still there. It's not that they've gone blue. So to them,
so let me directly
it becomes quite problematic, doesn't it, in terms of recognizing that this person's truly dead or not?
Absolutely. Means the brainstem death, as you know, I think the A&E physician will be able to tell us in detail, is this is the state where they are diagnosing that the brain stem is irreversibly damaged and it is not able to for the main functions to return. So the brain stem controls the circulation and the beating of the heart. So that patient who is in the intensive care unit is brainstem death. That means the heart is beating on its own. There's no control from the brain, and the respiration has stopped. It is just with the breathing machine that the respiration is maintained. So you're right, it is very difficult for the relatives.
Zubair, what's the fatwa on brain death? Is that an acceptable criteria or definition of death for Muslim scholars? Very difficult question.
This is the real question. Is it an acceptable criteria? When you say brain death, my question to you, would you refer to whole brain death, higher brain death, or brain stem death? Are you dying in America? Are you dying in the UK? Because in the UK, there's different criteria of death than that. Even for a person from the UK who travels to the USA, he will die differently in the USA than he would do in the UK. So there's different criteria. So which criteria do you refer to? Now, let me take you back. Okay, as a Muslim and within Islam, when we are saying somebody has died, what are we indicating by that? What are we saying by that? As far as the faith is concerned, as far as the belief is concerned, we are saying that the soul has departed from the body. That would be our definition of death. Now, the soul being something metaphysical, it's not something that we are going to be able to measure. We may have signs and indications, and the different definitions of death are at best signs and indications. Now, when it comes to brain death, when you define what death is, you have to remember within Islam we have a definition of a death: brain death, brainstem death, and higher brain death. None of these are trying to tell you when the soul leaves the body. None of them say this is the time when the soul leaves the body. They are measuring something else, right? So they're answering the question, what does it mean to die? Okay, so when it comes to brain death or whole brain death, the concept behind this definition, or the concept would be that irreversible absence of the body capacity to organize and regulate itself. So essentially what is saying here, the sum of the body parts and the functions, death is something more than just the sum of the body parts and functions. It's the ability to regulate. And once you lose that ability to regulate, then that person is dead, right? So this definition of death is something that even within America there are debates on this definition of death and whether it actually does represent death as we know.
Okay, Dr. Aasim Padela, I'm going to come to you, but before I do that, I just want to specify a couple of things. We have the International Organization of Islamic Medicine in 1981. We've got the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences. We've got the Third International Conference of Islamic Jurists of Jordan in 1986. We've got the Council of Islamic Jurisprudence Academy and Muslim World League, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Lebanon, and Oman in 1987. We even have Egypt and Pakistan to some extent, and we have the IOMS in Kuwait, who all come to this conclusion that brain death could be considered as a viable criteria for death, and hence, as a result, organs can be procured. Now, having said that, what are the issues here with brain death, criteria for death, the general difference between UK and USA? Is it solely about the issue of brain death, or is it about the sentiments that the governments there have to go through in relation to relatives and their acceptance of death? Could you just give us a bit more elaboration on that?
So it's a very complex topic, but the first thing I'll say for all our audience is that there's no such thing as brain death. I think the terminology we deploy is problematic. The Institute of Medicine of the United States, which has changed its name recently, but no longer use that term because it conveys confusion, right? Rather it's a neurological criteria for death, cardiac determination of death, meaning that you are now talking about some physiological phenomenon that is translated into the edifice of law, and you're saying, I'm using that criteria, right? What does it mean to have a cell died or a brain died? I don't understand that, both medically, but also popularly, it doesn't make sense. So I think all audience needs to get away from that. And I think that confusion actually persists within the ulama. They don't understand really what you're talking about. So brain death is a prognostic entity, meaning that means that physicians do not believe that we can return someone back from that state into a functioning human being who can interact with the environment around them. That's simply what it means, that the current state of medicine does not get that. And when we have criteria for brain death or neurological criteria for death, they are saying that the integrative function, right, is not there in the brain, therefore it can't integrate or process stimuli from the outside world, nor intervene on the outside world. That's what they're saying. So that's the first point. The second point about the difference between US and UK, I mean, you can say there's a difference between hospitals and difference between states in the United States, meaning that the way, but what we're talking about is not what's physiologic, but the way that's assessed, right? So that we say that the state of brain death is the same, but the way that the criteria upon which we decide someone has met the legal threshold for death might be different. Brainstem versus a whole brain, but we're saying the same physiological phenomenon is occurring within that brain. We just test it differently. We don't require confirmatory tests, or we do require confirmatory tests. And this difference actually has been used at times to move people from one state to another with more lax criteria. So there's a case, Jahi McMath, right? She was declared dead, quote unquote, in one state, moved to another state where she wasn't considered dead, because you can then continue to provide healthcare to that individual because they're more stringent on their criteria. So that's the difference. So it's different in countries, states, and even hospitals about the criterion upon which we assess that physiological state, not necessarily the physician's view that the state exists. Okay. But that boundary is being pushed by new criteria for neurological death, for minimal states, for even donation after cardiac death. So that's being pushed a bit, but I just want to share that. Anyway, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent.
So if I can just add here, this so criteria I understand, and I think as Dr. Padela mentioned, I think some of the ulmas are finding it hard to understand this concept, I mean, as a lot of physicians do. But the fact remains in UK is that there are standard tests which have been accepted by the intensive care society, not necessarily by the ulmas. And that's what has been followed for last 20 years in this country. And those criteria are being followed. And from them, it is considered as irreversible death, brainstem death. And that's when the organs can be procured. So the question about your procedure is, that you asked, Dr. Rafaqat, is once the brainstem death is confirmed by the two independent intensivists, then the surgeon comes in the picture to procure the organs in the more respectable way. I hope that answers.
Yeah, Dr. Mukadam, just explain, and I think this is another area of confusion, is the dead donor rule. Could you just give us a bit of an idea about what the dead donor rule is all about?
Sorry?
The dead donor rule. Dr. Padela? Or any of you?
Let me chime in.
Can I just interject there, please? Dr. Mukadam has talked twice about irreversibility, right? Under current protocols in the UK, when the organs are procured, at that point in time, it's not argued that the death is irreversible. Dr. Dale Gardiner and Andrew McGee, they produced a paper on this with regards to the sort of conflict between irreversibility and permanence. What they argue for is when we procure the organ, there is a permanence in the situation. That is why we are able to procure the organ, not necessarily that it's irreversible. The reason is it's not irreversible, but at that time you don't know whether it's irreversible or not. It's only the fact that because you are not doing any intervention to sustain that life, that is why that person will die. So they argue for permanence as opposed to irreversibility. When you look at the deliberations of the different fatwa, the fatwa bodies, they also said irreversibility. And irreversible means once you get to a stage, you cannot now bring that person back. And that's not what happens in the protocols in the UK and in the US as well. Rather, it's just a case of, okay, because we are not going in to intervene, then this person will die. So it's a permanence rather than irreversibility. Whereas the Muslim scholars require irreversibility.
Right. So the Mufti Zubair is absolutely correct. The problem is, again, conceptual terminology, right? So physiological irreversibility, I mean, we know that there's an individual who was declared brain dead in the 80s who survived 8 years after that, right? Which is why we've moved away from the term, because you can't say irreversible. What is irreversible, right? What parts of the brain come back if you maintain them on maximal support? So the whole thing is problematic because of the terminology deployed. That's why you just say neurological criteria for death today, right? It's different than 2005. 2015 is different. We have more studies. To the dead donor rule, let me just say two things, and then I'll leave it to the group. So the dead donor rule is not a rule. It's an ethical. It's an ethical construct that the medical syndicate has decided that we're going to abide by. There's no law, dead donor rule necessarily, meaning that there's a duty, a deontological duty, to not procure organs that will cause individuals to die. So, for example, and I think almost any faith would say this is impermissible, but if I say, yeah, I'm going to donate my heart, if you take my heart, I will die. So we, as the medical profession, say this is not something that we are called to do, and actually we are called not to do. We have a duty not to do that, because you will cause, by taking that organ, you're going to cause my death, and I can't donate something to kill myself. This is ethically problematic. But what has happened is that this dead donor rule has been stretched and massaged over the last 30 years, right? Meaning that the phenomenon of neurological criteria for death pushed the boundaries of death, right? So now I've declared someone neurologically dead, I can take their heart. Without their heart, they wouldn't live. But this construction, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong for the moment, but this construction, neurological criteria for death, allow now to push the dead donor rule a bit, because we know that someone couldn't survive without their heart or their lungs. but we can take it because we have declared them dead by some other criteria. Similarly, in donation after cardiac death protocols, we now say if someone is minimally conscious and someone is in a terminal state, we will take them and we will reduce maximal support and we'll see if their heart stops. We have decided that we're not going to do CPR. So if their heart stops for 2 minutes, we will declare them dead. We will then do CPR. We will then do CPR, restart their heart and donate it somewhere else, right? Because the decision was made to donate, the decision was made to not do CPR. There's a DNR order, and therefore we have now legally established someone is dead, and now we're going to take their heart. This caused disquietude within the medical community as well as in the religious community. Again, you've pushed the borders of that donor rule. So there's an ethical debate whether this is just something we did to get purchase from the public, and should we now change this notion of dead donor quote unquote rule, because it's not a rule, it's a ethical construct that we abide by and agreed by. So there's my point, that it's being pushed in different ways. There's a debate. I'll leave it there.
I mean, even amongst scholars, ethicists, and people from the medical profession, there's a lot of complexity behind that. So I can imagine it being even more complex if this was put to the general community. I'm talking about the general community and some of our listeners, and those who are viewing us right now. I'm just going to turn to some of the questions. We've got a number of questions, a whole list of them, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get the time for every single one of them. However, what I will do is I'll try to put some of these questions into certain themes so that we can address some of the important ones. Now, let me just start off with, excuse me if I'm saying the name wrong, but Satya Sharma, who is the chair of Promoting Organ Donation Group in Wolverhampton. And she asks the question, if it's okay to accept, if it's okay for Muslims to accept organs, surely it should be also okay for them to donate organs. And so should Muslims be excluded if they have reservations? So should we apply the principle in reverse? I'm opening this out to all three of you. Anyone who wants to respond to that?
If I can start, I think it's quite a valid question, and it's a very difficult and complex question. I think Mr. Zubair Mawlana Butt has been trying to work on this for some time, and I think let's see what his views are.
Mufti Zubair?
Before Mufti Butt, you speak, let me just clarify again for the audience. Recognize that the judgment of an act is not dependent on the judgment of another act. The act of donation is separate from the act of receipt. So this commonplace understanding, well, if you can do something, then why you can't do something else? That is not how even ethicists think, right? Forget about Islam. Think about acts. Acts are judged by that act and its intended goal by itself, not related to another act. So there are constructs where you string them together. You might say there's some logical fallacy here, but that needs to be explored. But you don't say because you can do something, you can do something else. That's not, that analogy doesn't work necessarily. You look at the act itself, then you think about analogies. So Mufti's right, I give you a layup now. Now you can take it home.
Exactly. Thank you for that very good question. First of all, what I would say is not all Muslims would say that organ donation isn't permissible. In fact, as is argued, a lot of would say that it is permissible. So I think if we can talk about that segment of the community, or those segment of Muslims that have reservations, as it was put, my response to that would be, it's not only Muslims that have reservations, it's other ethnics that also have reservations. And for me, what that question fails to do is to discuss the issue at hand and the pros and cons, and deontologically discuss the issue and of the pros and cons of organ donation. And it comes from a settled view that organ donation is permissible, and so therefore, organ donation is a good thing, and so therefore, are you in or are you out, kind of thing. So for me, I'm still at the stage where deontologically, is this something that should be promoted or not, should be done or not, and that's where I would advise the Muslim community to have that discussion at this moment in time. I could make a case. It's not my opinion, but I could make a case that once an organ has been procured and removed from a person, the harm has been caused, and so to transplant that particular organ wouldn't there would be no negative connotations to that. And so that as an ethical argument, that can be an argument that can be made. But it's not, like I said, it's not something I uphold, but it's not an argument that is easily understood by the general masses. But for ethicists, it's something like, yeah, well, it totally makes sense.
I suppose.
Thank you, Mawlana. If I can just add, obviously, transplant depends upon the availability of organs. And if people don't donate organs, how will anybody receive the organ? So I think it is related, though ethically I understand that it is a different issue. But if you put in realistic and in a pragmatic world, I think both are connected, and it worries me immensely that people are trying to separate this, and I'm worried for the community that this should not come to bite our community in future.
So let me answer that. So actually, I was at in April, I was at a conference at the International Xenotransplantation Conference. I was asked to speak there. And we were seeking approval from the United States government, not we, they were, to do human trials on xenotransplantation. And we have two animal models. One is baboons and the other is pigs. So that are in human trials, right? That are going to be in human trials. So the point here is you don't have to say that necessarily we have to donate organs from humans. There are other ways to do that. Similarly, as you know.
So if I can stop you there, xenotransplantation is still in very, very experimental stage.
Oh, no, I agree.
And it's still far away to go. And I think for it to come, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Padela. I think you are making a good point. But what I'm trying to say is at the present time, the xenotransplantation is years ahead. And as you know, that the question, if we separate, our community will then say, well, we will start just taking organs, and then there will be a question asked in future, why should you do that? So I'm worried about that. And I think as a community and as a responsible muftis and academicians, we should try and help the community to understand the question and see if we can help.
Let's just hold on for a second. Let's get Satya Sharma, the person who I addressed earlier on, who asked this question. Let's get her on. I think she might want to elaborate on her question.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah,
oh, great. Well, so you'll be shocked. It's not her.
It's not her. Right, okay.
Transplanted.
When you recovered from the shock, let me just say this.
Right.
I have heard the debate very carefully. The question is not only for Muslim community, it's a general question, but it's a question based on common sense. If there is a train which is going, either I can get onto the train or not, this is my choice. So the train of transplantation is going on. The train always has got good and bad points, and either I can get on the train or not. If I say, no, I don't want to go onto the train, there is nobody to stop me. So those people who are going to opt out of this have decided to abandon the train. So if they opt out, they should be allowed to opt out. But then they say, well, if you need the organs, you will not be participating in this. And there is no question of Muslim here. It's a question of common sense and humanity.
Can I? So I'm very sympathetic to these concerns. You should know that in the Netherlands, that this was an argument used by the health minister there, that Muslims take organs they don't give, and because of the current Islamophobia, should we just restrict their taking? So I think that your point and Dr. Mukadam's point is well taken. What I was trying to suggest was that we shouldn't look at the current state and say by necessity you must do things. Rather, what would be an Islamic vision for XYZ? And because you choose one road, sometimes the other roads aren't clear, right? So for example, we say, okay, some ulama might say porcine vaccines are okay, using good reasoning, but that means the pharmaceutical industry did not for 20 years decide, but we can use other media as opposed to porcine gelatin. So you start off saying we're going to do this, you focus your efforts there, it takes away from other areas you can focus. Now there are many donations, there are aspects of donation, living donation, for example, where you can give half your liver, people can give their kidney, people can give their lung, if they decide this is what they want to do. So it's not that all donation rests upon, people doing it in a deceased fashion. All I'm saying as an ethicist, we must understand what our vision would be and then take into societal considerations at the fatwa level, right? Okay, well, how does this play a role? Or is there going to be some challenge that they say you're takers and not givers? But the ethical question doesn't have to be this linked in that certain way necessarily, right? That's the contingency. You start off saying, what are the merits of donation and the harms of donation? What are the merits of transplantation, the harms of transplantation? And then maybe by darura, we say both are okay. But you start off individually. So I'm saying that because we have to have, right, because we have all this confusion, people don't take that time to disentangle it. They get up with confused answers that won't last the test of time. That's all. So I'm in a minority community, I understand. But I'm saying we want an answer, like Mufti Zubair said. Therefore, we link things together and jumble the reasoning to get that answer. Let's just start with doing it on its own merit, then look at our context. Well, we're a diaspora community. We're having a bad name. If they say all of a sudden you can't take organs because you don't donate, what are we going to do? Then they're going to say, well, that's our context. This is what we must do. This is our context. We don't want people to die. That's a different level of harm.
Can I just add to this? I think sometimes we sometimes get confused in terms of the role of the ulama and giving fatwa. And the role of the ulama and giving fatwa is solely based on textual evidence and a sort of legal reasoning methodology that they put forward, and then they come to a conclusion. But rather looking at the bigger picture in terms of what is considered in a community being the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do could be a separate discussion altogether. So for ulama, maybe the issue regarding the intensity of necessity or need in terms of accepting an organ clearly plays a higher sort of level in terms of need than it would be to actually giving out and donating an organ, which is probably something that many others could do within a community. But let's just move on, because there's a lot of questions. And one of the other questions that I would like to put to you all, this recurring point that keeps coming again: your body does not belong to you, it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mufti Zubair, our body doesn't belong to us, it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator. How do we get around that point? Ulama get around that point.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My own view on this area is that it doesn't really matter whether it belongs to you or not. The question is, are you allowed to do with, are you allowed to donate or not? Whether it belongs to me or not is not really the question. Yes, the body doesn't belong to me. I'm a trustee, but what do the terms of my trust? What do they allow me to do? Do they allow me to donate? And that's the question that needs to be answered. The fact that I don't own my body, it should not in itself be a restriction. So if organ donation is fine, I should be able to donate. If it's not fine, then even if it belonged to me, I still wouldn't be able to donate.
Okay.
There's an interesting take on this question by, I think, Sheikh Ali al-Jum'a or Sayyid al-Tawi, where he says that, as you said, Mufti Zubair, but we're allowed to donate the functioning of our organs. Right? I can hire myself to do some task. So there are precedences where you can say I am a trustee, but I can hire, I can do various things within this trust. And can we analogize those aspects of doing these things, like donating the physiological function of my body, to organ donation? So he's at a theoretical level, he says, let's start with that conversation, as opposed to Sha'arawi, who was talking about the ownership of the body.
Okay, there are a couple of statements here and there. I'll just mention one statement. My family is in the NHS, and one of my sons is a heart specialist in USA. We are all totally against organ donation. Interesting, right? Okay. We also have a couple of questions where I think it goes beyond the context of what we're trying to do today, and that's about the differences between the 4 major schools regarding organ transplantation. I think it's beyond the discussion today. This is an interesting question. I think it's important. These sensibilities that sort of tend to lie in the public domain. How long does it take to harvest organs, Dr. Mukadam?
So from identifying a donor to procuring the organs, it takes about 16 to 20 hours, and there are efforts by various organizations to try and reduce this time so that the families are not inconvenienced longer. And especially for our community, I have raised this point many times. I said, if we want our Muslim community to donate, then we have to see and try and reduce this time as best as we can. And the efforts are being made in the UK to try and do that. Because I am, as a Muslim, aware of the general feeling that we need to bury our near and dear ones as soon as possible. So there are efforts to try and reduce this time. I hope that answers the question. Is there any specific thing that you wanted to ask, Dr. Rafaqat?
Okay, no, that's fine. Just, I mean, just the time. I think sometimes people feel very uncomfortable that when they die or in the process of dying and organs are retrieved, you know, how long will that process take? How much? I suppose even though chances are they more than likely will not feel the pain of their organs being retrieved. I also believe that, I mean, this is a statement I remember somebody saying that they were quite felt strongly about this. He was saying that, you know, they are flushed with all sorts of drugs during this process. Can you just give us a bit more insight into that?
So flushed with drugs.
Yeah, you use those particular words. It just
no. So when the donor comes to the operating theater, they don't have any much anesthetic on, because we believe that some of the anesthetists feel that they don't feel pain. So there are no anesthetic agents, but paralyzing agents are doing, because the muscle can get very stiff, therefore you give paralyzing agents. So that is one of the drugs. The other drugs that are given are to protect the organs, such as high potassium to stop the heart, the lung. In order to protect the lungs, there are other solutions given, but these are given only after the circulation is stopped and the heart is stopping. So these are once into inverted commas, when the patient is considered dead, that's when these drugs are given. So I think it's a misconception that they're flushed with drugs. I think most of these drugs are given to protect or preserve the organs for long duration.
Okay, I'm getting quite a few comments, and the general theme of them is that if you are willing to take an organ but yet not give an organ or donate an organ, then this is an act of selfishness. Mufti Zubair, if you have people approaching you about this as somebody who's reputable as an alim in the society, what would be your response to individuals like this? I know you've sort of indicated some of your responses to that, but how would you deal with that?
See, my own personal view is that if you perceive organ donation or transplantation to be permissible, then organ donation for you is permissible. If you see it to be prohibited, then you shouldn't be taking an organ as well. That is my position that I stand on. However, I can see the ethical argument for somebody who argues differently. Whether it's selfish or not, you know, that's a different debate. But I can see an argument for it. Myself, I would say, okay, if you don't see it to be permissible, then you shouldn't be taking it.
Can I ask a question on that? So, Mufti Zubair, so say as just an armed person here that I am permitted to do something because of necessity. I'm not allowed to kill myself, right? And there's an option, even though it's tadawi bil haram, right? Haram. It is but then I'm meaning that it's something that's generally impermissible, but I do it because of a reason that I don't want to harm myself or some other higher order principle. So is it not, then can I say, well, then I'm doing this out of a contingent thing, but my normal belief is that this is not permissible, or something like that, right? So you're saying, you're linking them both, which is fine, but I'm saying that if someone's linking them by necessity on both ends, that's a different category, right? Or if someone's saying at one end this is necessity, but donating is not a necessity, how do you disentangle those?
It is a very tricky area. For you to be able to have organs transplanted, you need people to donate. So I think that if you say that my normal position is that it's not permissible, now I need it, it's necessity, it becomes permissible. Well, that necessity exists all the time. And that necessity can only be met if you have somebody who's donating. So then that donating would become a necessity.
Right, so they're linked by necessity.
These are not unequivocal arguments. Yeah. These are, you know, there's merits on both sides. I'm saying it is made as an argument. That's the point.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we're just moving on. There's a little comment here. The comment is, only trained doctors can diagnose death. Religious scholars are here to guide and give the religious perspective on this. they cannot decide how death is diagnosed. They are trained to do so. It's interesting because I was only reading a recent article from some of the resolution committees regarding the issue of death and some of the legal sort of Islamic Sharia legal discussions that were going on. And one of the things that was mentioned in there was, even when we turn back to the books of fiqh, in there, when they talk about signs of death, they talk about physical signs, and physical signs such as slanting of the nose and the sinking of the temporal areas, and so forth. So these are clearly physical signs. They're not sort of something which would be a Sharia concept. So on that basis, then they sort of conclude that as a result of this, that this is within the domain of medical practitioners. But then another issue tends to arise where certain ulama that I have talked to talk about this being an atheistic approach, which is interesting, an atheistic approach to death. I'm going to open this to all of you. What would your response be to that?
I think you have to answer the question, is death a physiological event or is it philosophical? So is it physiological or philosophical? For us as Muslims, death is a philosophical event where you have a departure of the soul. And all the criteria of brain death, brainstem death, none of them account for the philosophical death. Okay, so the two are different. So therefore, it's quite natural you are going to get a divergence between the two. The physiological,
do they not describe physical signs?
Yeah, the physiological.
It's not a philosophical discussion. It's clear signs that we should look out for. Signs.
Signs for what?
Certain signs, either, are they?
It depends what signs you are looking for. It depends on your philosophy or what your philosophical definition of death is first, and then you provide criteria to define that and to be able to measure that. But if you are totally, for example, the definition of death that's used in the UK is brainstem death. It's irreversible cessation of it's loss of consciousness and loss of the capacity to breathe. This is what you are measuring. You are not measuring whether the soul has departed from the body. So if you say it is the domain of the doctors, what are the doctors actually, or the medical profession, what is it actually measuring? Is it measuring departure of the soul from the body or not? If it's not, then it hasn't fulfilled the criteria for us as Muslims.
To clarify this issue, let me just say two things. And I think Dr. Rafaqat, you're making a point. So one is that, is it possible, Mufti Zubair, right? We should say, this is a disagreement, whether it's possible or not to understand the metaphysical reality of death and measure it in the world. That's the first premise, right? Can you actually measure the departure of the soul? This is a debate.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. So forget about that. So now if you say in the realm of the world, the books that you're mentioning are talking about a Muslim legal world. Can we have shurut that tell us that death has occurred and we can plainly see it? So then we can bury the body, right? It's not about can we divine where the soul is in the body, has it left or not? Rather, can we discern we can now bury the body, we can now do the rafa, we can do these things. So obviously it's worldly matters, so the criteria are worldly, that are apparent to all of us. Brain death caused, quote unquote, right, caused confusion here. Well, can we now have legal criteria that we say someone has departed the legal status of, no longer has the legal status of a human person? That's the question, not whether the soul has left. So I think we confound it by the terminology. And I said, like, yeah, there's an ontological reality. As Mufti Zubair said, no one's saying that the soul has gone anywhere or is there or not. We're not even discussing that. We're just discussing whether or not this person can be treated as dead by law. Islamic law and the law of the land.
But the only reason you would treat the person dead by Islamic law would be that the soul has left the body. That is a reliable indicator that it must have happened by now. We don't know exactly when it is. We don't know the exact point. And when asked, Allah simply said, you ain't going to find out. So, okay, but we have reliable indicators. And I think Imam Nawawi in the Shafi'i school, he talks about when there's a bit of doubt about whether the person has actually died, you just wait a little longer to ensure that the person has died.
Clearly stinks. Yeah, that's fine.
The brainstem death is taken very seriously. Even surgeons can't diagnose brainstem death. Can be diagnosed by only trained people who are intensivists and anesthetists, who are trained and who are senior enough to do that. So as a surgeon, I can't diagnose a brainstem death. Or as a physician, I'm sure Dr. Padela, being an A&E consultant, I don't know whether he can diagnose. So this is all a science which has developed and evolved over a period of time based on the evidence that was there and present in a majority of people. And there might be some evidence to suggest otherwise, but the majority of the evidence does say that brainstem that is the present criteria are acceptable, and hence I leave it to that, because as a surgeon, even I can't diagnose brainstem death, and as other physicians can't. They are only trained people who can diagnose that. So I think we can have this discussion for days and years together.
Somebody who is diagnosed brainstem dead does not necessarily mean they don't have brain function.
That's correct. That's right. But let's just take this. So again, let's move away death. This criteria for death. Look, and a person comes to the emergency department, right? And they have CPR. They've been in the field for 30 minutes. They come in and they have no heartbeat except for the heartbeat when we're pushing on his chest. I say, person's dead. Every day, person's dead. Now, it could be that 2 minutes later, you put them on an ultrasound machine, you can see some palpitations of the heart. I've declared them dead. Because why? Because that is not going to sustain their physiological function, right? They're not going to have a blood pressure. I don't need to look at an ultrasound. I've turned the machines off. So every day I decide who is dead legally. I'm not saying the soul is there or not there. That's not. And if the ulama tell me that something, okay, let's look at criteria for the soul, this is probably that me and Mufti Zubair need to do. Yeah, fine. But I don't have that. So we are mystifying something that's a common occurrence in the hospital.
I think the complication comes is when you want now that you decide that the person is dead. Previously, if it's a case of he hasn't died, he'll die soon. And because we're not doing anything to the body, it doesn't really matter. Now it's a case of this person is dead. Now we need his organs, you see.
Beautiful.
Now we're going to do something to him. Now that this is why the ethical debate arises. So you can't just get away from it and say, okay, well, he's going to die. He's likely to die anyway.
Okay, let's just hold it
to clarify for our audience.
Let's just hold it up for a second. I think this is another very interesting statement made by an anonymous attendee, which highlights, and I think what's really important here is also the relative's perspective and the patient's perspective to this. So this particular attendee has just put this little sort of statement up here, and I want to read it out to you guys. I have come across a patient who was taken to the theatre to have his organs retrieved, but he did not die within the required time period after organ support was turned off. So retrieval could not go ahead, and he was then taken back to ITU for palliation. But he made full recovery and walked out of hospital only a few days later. How does this make you feel? So guys, how does this make you feel?
Obviously uncomfortable. I think this is a question where donation after cardiac death, and there have been and this is an usual situation where the treatment is withdrawn and then you have to wait for the heart to stop, and it takes sometimes variable time for it to stop. I think this is a question. I think there's a lot of research going on, and this issue is not yet resolved as to how long it takes. Once the treatment is withdrawn, the heart will stop after how long, and when the organs can be taken. So this is a very uncomfortable situation, and as an A&E consultant, I'm sure Dr. Padela must have come across this, where the treatment is donation after cardiac death. I think it still needs some more work, and this is different from donation after brainstem death. And this situation, I've heard about the situation. I think that one patient, such a thing has happened, and it makes people uncomfortable. And after that, the intensivists are asked to wait longer before confirming that the patient is dead. And now, instead of 5 minutes before, it's 10 minutes that the doctor has to wait before the patient is declared dead after withdrawing the treatment. So this is, I don't know whether I'm making myself clear, this is a different kind of donor compared to the brainstem death donor.
Yeah.
So in the United, I was doing some research here in the United Kingdom. The most common, from what I was reading, type of donation occurs after donation after declaration of cardiac death, what we were just talking about. This is a greater number than donation after brain, quote unquote, brain death or neurological criteria.
No, I think Dr. Padela, I've got the numbers here.
Yeah.
The donation after brainstem death is about 4 times higher than the donation after cardiac death.
So
it was less previously. It is more because of various other reasons, which I don't think we can discuss here. But if I may correct you, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. The thing that we should.
Hello, can we hear you?
Sorry, for the individuals, we should recognize that there are different. This is why the fatwa question is important, right? Do fatwa speak about this context, right? Of donation after cardiac declaration of death, 75 seconds, 2 minutes, or 5 minutes, or 10 minutes. The fatwa don't. Right? This is why there's lack of clarity, because these new pushing boundaries of procedures and protocols are ones that have not yet been taken up.
Dr. Padela, can I say something controversial here if I haven't already said so? My reading on this is a lot of the discussion that exists around this is in the English language and it's in the West, the academic discussions. And a lot of the deliberations happen in the Middle East, with generally from scholars who don't have access to English. So therefore you find that the deliberations are precautionary. That's why you have the issue of irreversible. You decide when it's irreversible. We just want it to be irreversible, and that's it. And so at the current protocols in the UK, nobody's claiming that at this moment in time when we procure the organs, it's actually irreversible. They're just saying it's permanent. And so that's why we have the discussion. I mean, for the last 2-3 months, I've been reading up on this issue because of the opt-out issue, and all the discussion is in the Western academics, and there's hardly any discussion amongst the Muslim scholars or the Muslim academics in the Middle East or Muslim countries. So that's where you have the problem.
The thing, the thing that was very good about these discussions, theoretically in the juridical councils, was that you would have Muslim physicians charged with canvassing the Western quote-unquote literature and presenting, well, here's James Burnett's view, here's Childress's view, and the assumption was that the Muslim physicians would be able to digest that and present it in a way to ulama. This is what occurred 20 years ago. I think that was a faulty premise, but at the same time, in Pakistan even we have medical technology that's the same in Pakistan that's in the United States being applied in places, right? So there's a globalized nature of the medicine that occurs the same everywhere. So you're right that there's a translation issue, there's a dislocation issue. We have to remedy that. So that's why we put you up, Sheikh. Yeah?
Okay, let's just move on to another question, which is more related to the Islamic Shari sort of perspective to this. And I think it's worthwhile asking this question for many people who still don't grasp this idea about the legal reasoning process. So a question to Mufti Zubair regarding the concept of istihsan. Istihsan is to do with public interest or maslaha. So when we come to the issue regarding there's a real dire need, especially amongst Muslims who tend to be, in quite a large prevalence of diabetes, and also end organ damage, i.e., for example, kidneys. So they're in need of kidneys. So it's a real issue for South Asian patients, also for Muslims who clearly play a certain percentage of the South Asian population. Isn't there an issue of public interest here and something which is of a nature of necessity? Now, is this something that gets discussed amongst the ulama circles? Have these kind of things been discussed? Istihsan, maybe?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I have yet to come across it in the UK, let's put it that way. The whole issue is one of interest to harm. The whole discussion of organ transplantation is one of interest versus harm. Okay. The question is, which is the greater? Is the interest greater than the harm? And that is the whole debate. Meaning to procure the organ from an individual, for a live donor or cadaver, is that something that can be tolerated because of the interest that we will achieve at the end of it, of bringing back a vital function of somebody who's living, or ensuring that they don't die, etc. So that is the debate, whether the person is actually dead or not, and brain dead or brain stem death. Beyond that discussion is one of, are we, the violation of the sanctity that we have to perpetrate, is that something that can be tolerated because of this fantastic result that we can get at the end of it? And that's the whole.
Sorry, I think my connection is lost.
Okay. My particular view is that this is very much one based on norms, social norms, and this will change with time and place. So previously, where something was seen to be impermissible, for example, the use of human hair, use human nails, etc. In the past, scholars have opined that this is not permissible to use human hair, in treatment or for any other reason, because of the sanctity of the human body, and with all its parts. Now, the issue of what is honorable, what is not honorable, if it's not something that is enshrined and or the parameters of that are not exactly outlined in the Quran and the Sunnah, then that is something that very much depends on custom, benefit, on the ta'amul. And for me, that is something that where it has changed over the years. Something that was seen as to be impermissible because it compromises human dignity is not seen to be the same today. And so therefore there can be a change in that particular issue. Then there is the issue of, okay, when you're procuring an organ, if you procure simply a kidney, is that okay or not? If you're procuring multiple organs, if you're procuring sort of external organs, your hands, the face, nose, etc., and when does that reach a level, if it does, that we can say, hang on, this I'm becoming a bit uneasy now, because this just seems to be, compromise human dignity.
Okay.
On what is human dignity?
So sorry, my connection was lost, and I couldn't hear the last 10 minutes of the conversation.
Okay, Dr. Mukadam, the admin will deal with the connection, ensure that everything's okay. Just moving on. There are a lot of questions here, and I understand that some people are getting a bit frustrated that the questions are not being addressed, but we will give an opportunity for them to put their questions forward to us, Al Balagh Academy, and we'll try to address some of those questions. But you must also understand that we're very limited in the time in what we can address. So, clearly we won't answer all your questions. We've got another question which is addressed to Mufti Zubair again, regarding organ donation. Some of the viewers, I think, that you're sitting on the fence here. They want a clear black and white answer. Is it permissible to donate your organ when you die?
You give me a clear subject of discussion, and I give you a clear answer. The whole issue, I said, the Western ethicists are not settled on this issue. I've read papers where it is accepted that when we procure the organs, the person is actually alive. But they still argue that because it's with their permission, it's not a bad thing. So when you have a whole range of arguments, how am I supposed to come to a conclusion? For me, that is a bad thing. You're taking organ when somebody who is alive, and this idea of dead donor rule. One idea of that: don't do anything to the patient that would kill the patient. That's one understanding of dead donor rule. Another understanding is you only take organ from a person who is actually dead. Right? That's the standard. So even what the dead donor rule is, there are different understandings of that. So if you want a clear-cut answer, give me clear-cut information, I will give you a clear-cut answer. And if you give me clear-cut information, I'll say if it's this, and if it's done, then it's that.
I think Mufti Zubair Mawlana is being unfair here. I think there have been several answers to his question.
Dr. Mukadam,
the community
we're struggling here.
It's a clear directive on this, and I think there have been.
Okay.
Can I? So my respected brethren here and sisters on the call, we often want pragmatic someone to tell us what to do, and then when they tell us what to do, we don't want to do it. So be careful. I think the issue really is that there's a plurality of views. Alhamdulillah, yeah, and we are the moral agents ourselves. We must take it upon ourselves when we make any decision to make sure that we feel we can stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have done due diligence to take that action. whether it's buying a house, whether it's getting married, or whether donating organs. So I think there is some hikmah in saying, okay, let's have a conversation about the various views and know that, look, there's debate. So alhamdulillah, nothing is clearly haram, and you can hold two positions at the same time. It's permitted in certain circumstances and impermissible in certain circumstances. So I think we just need to, as a community, elevate our discourse. And that's why you're here at the seminar, right? To understand that there isn't a single shortcut answer. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it. We wouldn't have this conversation, period.
Okay, I've got a...
It's good to have a discussion, and I'm glad that this discussion is taking place. And I think our community needs to engage and have these discussions and try and resolve this rather than create more questions. I understand. I think we all understand the ulmas are in a difficult position because they are not getting all the answers, and it is very difficult to provide all the answers. But with the answers that we have, we need to guide our community to come to a proper decision, because we don't want our community to be left out from this type of treatment, which is helping a lot of people and suffering people. And we as clinicians should not feel frustrated when this sort of treatment is not available to our community members.
Okay, Mufti Zubair,
members. I think
just coming back to yourself,
there's slightly more.
Dr. Mukadam, I think we're having some issues trying to get some quality sound.
Yes.
So just a general, another question. This is partly my reading on the issue. I'm not really expecting my opinions too much here, so I'm going to say something now. From my reading of some of the verdicts from some of the legal discussions that have been happening amongst the ulama committees, and maybe you guys can elaborate on some of the issues. One of the issues about, probably one of the most fundamental points, was about brain death. That was one issue, and I recognize that using the term brain death can be quite confusing sometimes as well. And also the issue related to the question of need and diagnosis and appropriate diagnosis, making sure the diagnosis is accurate. One of the things that tends to come out, and probably also more recent literature that's out there, and a lot of this is in Arabic anyway, is about the issue of, about the rulings from a Shari perspective, from an Islamic perspective, of somebody who is considered as dying, or whether this is an event or a process. And that some of those rulings can be applied in terms of when somebody has been diagnosed as brain death, and then other rulings will be applied, such as the laws of inheritance and so forth, when somebody has now reached a stage where they're ready to be buried. So there's an interesting kind of conversation. So this area is quite complex. It's not as straightforward as people make it out to be. That's just a statement I'm making. I'm not going to put a question to you guys. But I'm just going to finish up because we reached the end of our session. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this forward to each one of you to just put a few final words for the attention of those people who are attending our webinar. Just a few words in terms of your general feelings, and with that, whether you are willing to donate your organ. Dr. Aasim Padela, do you want to start off?
Yeah, Sheikh. So you're asking me for a ruling. I'm not one who gives rulings. So alhamdulillah,
just your feeling about this issue.
So no, but I think it's important. So as I shared with someone on text here, I'll tell you my position. I treat these rulings by ulama as all actionable, meaning that my duty is to figure out and get the knowledge from the ulama, right? So I ask them, and I say, okay, well, these are all actionable. Does this apply in my context? So when they say irreversibility, is there irreversibility, right? Is there not? When they say certain things are permissible by darura, then the darura is my subjective issue and need. This is how the Hadith Hanafi ulama talk about this, right? So do I believe this is necessity? And that's how I proceed with any view. And then I make istikhara. And so I am in the game of saying, well, look, I am not an alim. I'm trying to converse with them. I have various rulings. And my teacher said that, alhamdulillah, this tells you that's an issue that has ijtihad in it, that there's nothing clear. This actually gives you a chance to be a moral agent truly. Make decisions and make istikhara and make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide you. That's how I treat it. And then on these fora, I try to critique each view. and point out, hey, look, there are problems with this view. So Dr. Rafaqat, you're actually the alim and the physician. So perhaps you would be the best person answering what your view is, as opposed to me. But that's how I take it, right? So, and I'll say this one for the group. To me, in my reading, living donation seems to have less issues than this notion of deceased donation and donation after cardiac evaluation of death. Meaning, first person consents to donate to a relative about some kidney or something, seems to have less issues if it's not going to cause you harm than anything else. So I think amongst the least debated ones is that one. Across the ulama, there are some who hold that it's not permissible.
Okay, Aasim, can I just interject there? Why is it that we're still getting Muslims who are less likely to donate bone marrow whilst they're alive?
It's an invasive procedure, right? I mean,
yeah, they're reluctant to even give bone marrow.
So people don't give blood. Forget about bone marrow. Blood.
Yeah.
I'm an ER doctor, right?
Yeah.
Right. We have blood shortages all the time. Yeah. So the Muslim community is not the Muslim community. It's just generally. You have to sort of separate the general and the Muslim issue, right? General people don't donate blood. The majority don't. And this is not right. So why are we talking about something that's much more invasive?
Yeah.
The common person on the street has not donated their blood.
And I think the point to take
even though that is something that even blood donation and even bone marrow donation, I would say is permissible. But people are not donating. I mean, unequivocally, I would say permissible, not a problem. However,
so I think it is good to have this conversation. And as a final thought, I would like to urge to be brave enough to have this conversation. I would encourage all our listeners who have participated today to have this conversation and try and get more information. From my point of view, as you may have already realized, that I'm quite clear in my mind that what I am doing is ethical and according to the Islamic principles, based on my discussions with some of the ulmas that I have conversed with. And I think this organ donation is an important act of generosity, and everybody should think it through rather than just go and say I'm opting out. I think that is not the answer to this. Now in UK, we are at a situation where the opt-out is coming in, whether we like it or not. Though we as Muslim physicians, we have given a representation, there are some concerns, but since it is coming in, we need to make sure that we are thinking it through and just not going and pushing the button of opt-out, which will marginalize our community. I think we need to be sensible here, and it is the responsibility of learned ulmas like Mufti Zubair, Aasim, Padela, and there are several others who should guide us, guide the community into making the right decision. I'm not saying donating organ is the right decision, but according to me, it is right. I am on the organ donor register, and I would urge you to consider. I don't know how many of the panelists are on the organ donor register. I think it is interesting to know this aspect when somebody is participating. So that is my final thought. So I would urge everyone to think about before thinking of opting out on this subject that it is coming through now.
Okay.
I hope you can hear me, because I don't know whether you are able to hear me or not.
Okay. No, yes, we can hear you.
Can I just add, I am on a journey myself. In a couple of weeks, I am seeing one of my senior teachers, as well as one or two other ulama. We're getting together to have a look at this issue. I'm also in conversation with NHSBT and colleagues from there as well. So this is a work in progress for me. I haven't come to the end of the journey yet. I am still on the journey, and hopefully this collaborative efforts with Dr. Padela, inshallah, hopefully will bring some fruit, inshallah.
And I think just to summarize, a quite important point, that if there's anything that I've taken from this, is that the issue of permissibility and impermissibility and the sort of grey area that exists between that, clearly there's been a number of different resolution committees around the world have clearly identified and said it's permissible to donate organs. And there's also been a clear sort of conclusion about that the current understanding of diagnosing somebody who has reached a stage where organs can be procured are in line with the processes at the moment in UK and America, various other countries as well. So it becomes more of a personal issue for people. So, you know, at the end of the day, even though if there was a clear-cut permissibility here, the question is, would you still donate? You know, so there is a personal decision here, and this is not just solely a thing for Muslims. This is for any kind of community, of any kind of ethnic background or any kind of religion. They have to make those kind of decisions for themselves. I'm in the process at I'll tell them about myself. I'm in the process at the moment of, you know, going through this journey of doing my own personal research in this area, and at this moment in time in my research, I am getting closer and closer to this idea that it seems that very likely I will be on that donor register once I've completed my research, and I am convinced that all avenues are clear for me. And that's my own personal opinion. However, going back to this discussion on the bigger debate about organ donation, I think it's also important that this is not just a discussion that should be held amongst academics, ulama, and so forth, but rather it has to be a discussion that has to go right down into the root of the community, and people need to talk about this much more openly, rather than to dismiss this as something that you know, we can't do or we shouldn't be doing. But rather, let's get into the details about what would be sensible and what our sensitivities are regarding some of these issues. So I'll leave it at that. I want to thank all the panelists for their time. Alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khair for all of you. May Allah reward you for your time and your efforts. And you guys are also, we will be continuing your work in this area in every capacity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for all the efforts that you are putting in. And this is, you know, a welcome sort of, as we say, mujahida, an effort that you guys are putting in for not just general people, but the Muslim community as well. Again, thank you very much for your effort and time. And also for those of you who are attending Al-Balagh webinar, inshallah, there will be many more sessions related to medical issues as well as many others in the near future. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.